at UVU, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to this session. Before we go into the specifics of this panel discussion, I just want to call your attention to the fact that we've been hosting sessions throughout the week around the theme of ethics, education, and democracy. And so educational ethics are at the heart of what we're doing this week, and we felt it appropriate and important to host a session that focuses on our practices here at UVU and the ethical dimensions of the decision-making process here across campus. For those of you who are interested in the other sessions that we've been hosting, if you scan the QR codes on the walls, you can go right to the website, which has a full schedule. And we've also posted some readings and video links if you want to learn more on each of these topics. So we'd encourage you to do that if you're interested. We're very pleased to have two of our senior administrators here for this discussion, Dr. Alexis Palmer and Dr. Wayne Vaught. I will introduce them. The format of this session will be that each of them has been invited to reflect on the issues and events in their careers that have shaped their ethical thinking and how it impacts their administrative role here on campus. So Dr. Wayne Vaught is the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at UVU, and he is a professor of philosophy. And I emphasize the "and." That's very important to those of us in philosophy. He came to UVU in 2019 from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he served as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Chair of the Department of Philosophy. Wayne is a specialist in bioethics with a focus on pediatrics and cross-cultural conflicts in healthcare settings. He is the author and co-editor of 2 books, including Ethics Across the Professions, which is now in its 2nd edition.
I think it's 3rd.
3rd? Great. And also a book entitled Morality and the Good Life, which is an introduction to ethics. I'm also pleased to have Dr. Alexis Palmer here. Alexis is the Dean of Students and Associate Vice President for Student Development and Well-Being here on campus. Alexis is a longtime member of the UVU community, and she has served as the Senior Director of Community Education and Director of the Volunteer and Service Learning Center. Beyond this, she has been very active in a variety of initiatives and programs, including women's success, inclusion, and student leadership. Her work has been recognized with multiple awards and honors, including the Presidential Award of Excellence and the University College Teaching Excellence Award. And I must say that it's a delight to work with both of them closely. I have the pleasure of team teaching and ethics and values class with Wayne, and Alexis and I go way back to bygone days working on various issues and initiatives, and so this is personally very gratifying for me to be able to have this conversation and to invite the campus community to think through challenging issues together and to do it in a spirit of transparency and candor and openness and respect. So without further ado, Wayne, if you want to lead off, and then we'll go with Alexis and then open it up.
I will. Remember the respect part.
Yeah, that's gone.
Well, welcome, everyone. This is a great opportunity for me to take time out of my day of, sometimes I refer to the provost job in different sorts of ways. Often it feels like a bit of whack-a-mole, putting out dumpster fires, all the types of high administrative issues that come up. That come across my desk. So to take some time out to go back to my roots of philosophy and think about what are some of the ethical implications of the decisions that are being made in the provost office in particular, what ethical principles guide my day-to-day activities. I'm happy to have that conversation here today.
Could you put the microphone?
Oh, is it not on?
It's on. It's
just a little closer.
Yep.
So there we go. Sorry about that. I've tentatively gave my little presentation a title, which was either Ethics in Administration or What I Learned as a Basketball Referee. And I say that with some degree of humor and actually some degree not. I refereed basketball for about 25 years. Even last season, I picked it back up. I thought when I moved to Utah, that would be the end of my career of officiating basketball, but it's just something I couldn't quite let go of. I've told people that you have to have hobbies. One of the things in any administrative position, you have to have diversions from the day-to-day routine in life. And I've told people refereeing basketball is the way I relax. And then they must think that either I'm crazy or have a really high-stress job if getting yelled at on a basketball court is what you consider relaxation. But I have told people over the years that I think some of the skills that I learned that have helped me to have what success I have had as an administrator, I actually learned on a basketball court. And in terms of transferable skills, when you think of yourself, wherever you are, whatever courses you're taking, the humanities, we've had multiple conversations of multiple groups about the role and importance of humanities in your work life once you leave. And that's absolutely true. There are transferable skills that you're going to have in whatever class it might be and whatever activity it might be. And in this case, refereeing basketball really set me up to develop some pretty good skills at managing obviously very tense situations, very high-pressure situations. There is emotionally charged situations where everyone has a particular outcome that they want of that situation. They have an interpretation of what just happened on the court. Theirs may not agree with the exact one that you just had and the one that you're now making. And so sometimes those can lead to confrontational discussions on a basketball court. And so working as a basketball official, and I don't know what you think about it in terms of when you watch games or you see officials officiating on the field, it's not just about blowing a whistle and knowing the rules of the game. It's actually more about personnel management. Because when you are in that environment and when you're working, you are taking a leadership role. It's one in which you don't want to be noticed. Referees will talk, the last thing we want to do is end up on a clip on ESPN. Because if a referee ends up on a clip on ESPN, it's not for any particularly good reason or really good call that was made. It usually is something went really, really badly. But you have 10 people on a basketball court that you're managing directly. You have 2 coaches that are standing on the sideline that you're trying to keep in their particular playing their particularly appropriate role in the basketball game and trying to help everyone stay focused on what they're supposed to be doing. And so you'll have conversations with players quite regularly who might be erring on the side of doing something other than what they should be focusing on the court. Whether that's talking smack to another player on the court, whether that's doing whatever it is that they're doing, you may stop and have a subtle conversation either during a timeout or in that trip. If you're watching an official come up the court, they may step over to a player and just hint that they ought to be behaving a little bit differently. So a lot of what you're doing in basketball is personnel management. It's not rules enforcement. It's not just kind of being the authoritarian on the court. It's really trying to keep the organization running smoothly so that the fans are enjoying the game, the players are enjoying the game, and then at the end of the day, you walk out, and most officials will say, if you can walk out and they can't remember who was on the court, you've done a really, really good job. Being a provost is very similar to that. When I go out with the president and she introduces herself, hi, I'm President 2 minutes. Oh, yes, I was President UVU, yes, blah, blah. And this is my provost. And I get that look. And I say, you know what a provost is? And they go, no. And so I try to explain to them, well, it's you're the second executive officer of the institution. You got the president, you got the provost. I run all of the academic aspects of the university, which is a kind of a small part of what a university does. And then you have a number of other vice presidents who are doing very important things that help the university run as well. But entering my first game that I ever refereed was in 1989. I just graduated from college. I was in graduate school in Louisville, Kentucky, and I decided I loved basketball. I wanted to try refereeing, and so I got assigned to some games. It was an adult league, adult recreational league at like 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. I can't remember how long the games ran. I thought I was going to get killed. I was lucky I actually made it home. These were people who gotten off work, had a few drinks, now let's go play some basketball. And they were probably a little past their prime in terms of, their expectations of what their bodies could do. And it was an incredibly awful experience, one that I wasn't particularly well prepared for. And it took many years. Actually, I moved and went to graduate school somewhere else, and so I was like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. And then I kind of, let me try it again. Finally, I got, when I moved to Kansas, started really refereeing and going to camps and learning how to officiate the game and those sorts of things, and some prior to that as well. Being a university administrator is often not a whole lot different. Typically what happens is that you start your job as a faculty member in a department. You, for whatever reason, fail to attend a meeting and find yourself elected as the department chair. And then they say, here's a course schedule, here's some evaluations, good luck. Fortunately, a lot of people want the job and try to do a really good job, but oftentimes that's the way an administrative career starts. And it wasn't dissimilar for me. I started as a department chair, I thought I'll do this for a few years, then I'm going to go back to the faculty, which is the best job in the world. And then somebody said, well, would you want to be an associate dean? So I did that, and then I was like, I'll do that for a few years, and then I'm going to go back to faculty because that is the best job in the world. And then I became a dean, and long story short, here I am at UVU as your provost. What are some of the skills that I learned and some of the things that I've thought about that are important to being a provost, and I think help me as I try to be not only an effective in my job, in my role, but one where I can go home feeling good about the decisions that have been made, knowing sometimes they're incredibly difficult decisions to make. They often literally keep me awake at night. There are many times when you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning stressing over a particular decision, some issue that you're confronting. But at the end of the day, you have to walk away feeling you've made a good decision and that you've made one that's morally, for me, morally sound and defensible. So here's some of the things that I've taken from my career as a basketball referee that have helped me as a provost. And the first is the professional development and knowledge base. Again, that first game as an official was disastrous. I mean, it is lucky I didn't get hit. One of the other officials did, some stitches above the eye. I managed to escape, but I really didn't know what I was doing. You have to understand the game, of course. You have to know what the objectives of the game are. You have to know what the players are trying to accomplish. You have to know defensive and offensive strategies. You have to know exactly what they are trying to accomplish so that you can enforce the rules in a way that's appropriate for the game. You're trying to ensure that there's equity on the court, that people aren't getting an unfair advantage and violating the rules in such a way that they get an unfair advantage. And to do that, you have to study, you have to learn, you have to read, and as an academic administrator, you have to do the same thing. It can be sometimes easy to step into a role as a department chair and just kind of go through the motions or whatever, but there are opportunities to learn. There are conferences, there's material, there are journals, there are the Chronicle of Higher Education. There are lots of things that an administrator has to really absorb themselves into, just like studying the rules of the game of basketball in order to be effective in there. And then you have to understand situations. So you know what the hardest call to make in basketball is? Any basketball fans here? Offensive or charge or a block. It's going to be a charge or a block. And it's a drive, particularly as you elevate the game and get into the professional levels. It happens in an instant. And you're standing there, and part of it's positioning yourself in the right place so that you have the right angle to see the call. But it's the hardest call to make in basketball, and you have to understand the movement. You have to be able to capture and absorb things very quickly, and you only get that from watching games. You only get that from looking at tape and looking at film and slowing the film down, which the nice thing, you know, when they show the officials making a bad call on basketball, they show you the replay in about a third of the time that the official has to review and make that same call. But the more you watch, the more you engage yourself, the more likely you are to make the right call and being in the right place to do that. And that's the same thing, I think, to be an ethically astute higher education administrator. Just being in positions to learn, to just engaging yourself at the university. It's one of the reasons why it really almost becomes a lifestyle as opposed to just a job. We're always here. We're always trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to get as much practice and court experience, as it were, as we can. And if you continue to engage in these opportunities for professional development, and some of it's just learning and meeting, talking to other provosts. So I create a network of peers that I have across the country. I can meet some of these at conferences. And it's something I think that you should, as you enter your own professional careers, whatever that may be, whatever leadership role that you have, keep in mind that you don't know everything. You never will know everything, and you can never always be in a position where you are the best person to make a decision. And sometimes you just want to take a step back, talk to some people about this. Talk to somebody particularly who's not involved, who can be objective, who can listen, who can give you feedback, so that you can incorporate that into your decisions. And if you take the time to do that and can draw on the experience and skill of other people, which is exactly what basketball referees do. We meet, we talk, we go out, drink, talk about plays, look at film, try to analyze the situations. There's a lot that goes in that you don't see it, and there's a lot similarly for a provost. Be open to feedback and advice from others. In any career position that you have, and this is one of the things they've always talked to us in basketball referee school and camps that we go to, you're only going two directions. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're never stagnant. You don't just kind of hover right there. So you're either working hard to try to improve each time, do something better the next game, the next time, the next decision you make. You want to do better, or you're kind of calling it in and you're just kind of letting your skill sets diminish and decrease, in which you're not going to be as effective. And so being open to feedback, having an open and growth mindset, recognizing that, you don't know everything. You don't have to see yourself and shouldn't try to see yourself as the smartest person in the room. You're drawing on the strengths of other people, whether those be mentors, whether those be your colleagues, whomever it is you're working at. If you start to close yourself off from those types of experiences, you create opportunities to become siloed, and your decisions can become not only less effective, but potentially morally concerning as well. So create an environment where people feel comfortable to state their perspective around you. This is something I've tried to do. I have a couple of my colleagues here. They can attest to it, and remember, they'll be evaluated. But they can attest to whether it's true or not. I have always, throughout my administrative career, tried to tell my team, you can say anything to me that you want. And quite frankly, on the campus, I try to maintain that same philosophy. People will come and they'll talk about what a hard job, you were in a meeting, they were yelling at you, they were mad, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I guess they were. I mean, people have opinions, they have strong ideologies, and one of the things I think is most important is to let people have that avenue and that venue to discuss and to challenge. I don't mind being challenged. I've made decisions that people don't agree with, and I'm certainly willing to listen to. I want my team to tell me. I've always told them, if I have a really bad idea, I'd rather you tell me now than tell me later when we've tried to implement the really bad idea. So you're only going to really be strong if you're open to that type of criticism. It doesn't mean that you necessarily will change your mind, but if you are closed to that type of feedback, it's going to create a situation where, again, you're going to be less effective as an administrator at the end of the day. It may not be a pleasant experience, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be one that's going to make you a stronger administrator, and it's going to be one that helps you avoid ethical harms that you might cause otherwise. Create a strong leadership team. And I think one of the things that is interestingly challenging in higher education is this concept of shared governance that we embrace, that we have an environment where everyone, faculty, staff, administration, are part of a team that are assigned to try to make important decisions around important issues as they come up. And so creating that team and recognizing the roles of the individuals on the team and respecting those people, I think, is one thing that you can do that's not only ethical because you're showing respect and engaging people where they need to be, but it's going to, again, help you be more effective as an administrator. I strive to be fair and equitable, transparent in decision making. We make all kinds of decisions all the time. And so sometimes they have to be fast. I mean, that block charge call, you don't got a lot of time, right? You got to see it coming. You got to see, typically you're going to see the defender set up. You're going to see the offensive player set up, and you know that they're going to go one place. They're going to make a drive to the basket, or they're going to pass off. So you've got to kind of slightly anticipate what's going to happen, but you have to be in a position to see that call and make a split-second decision. There's something also that officials get hammered into their heads from day one, and it's called to have a patient whistle. Has anybody ever watched a game and the official kind of delays a second? And you're like, oh, it's a late call. You didn't know what was going on there. Anybody ever yelled at a referee about that? Yeah, there you go, right there. While referees sometimes do kind of lose sight of something and we all make bad calls at the end of the day. Most likely what happens if you see a delayed call, it's because the official is taking a second to take a step back, watch the play fully develop, and see if there was a violation of the rule that occurred. And especially in high-level games, there's contact. Basketball is not a non-contact sport. It is a contact sport. But what happens is there are certain types of contact that can either impede your direction, your speed, or your ability to maneuver yourself. And these are the things where you have to make a call. So the officials, let me take a second. Okay, there was nothing there. I'm going to let that go. There was some contact, we're letting that go, versus contact that the official deems infringed upon the rules. And that's similar in higher education. I think that, we have to take a step back sometimes, be patient, absorb the information, not have that gut reaction. It's really easy. Somebody comes in and says, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe so-and-so did A, B, and C, and D, and you're like, oh, that sounds awful. But I've learned very much that, the first story is not always the last story. I take very seriously when somebody tells me or is concerned about something that has happened, but at the same time, I try to be very cautious. I want to hear all sides of the story. I want to be patient before we move in any particular direction. Otherwise, you can infringe upon or hurt somebody inadvertently by acting too quickly. And then the officials I made a call. I knew it was a bad call. I've reported the call. I was like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. And the coach is like, motions me over and is like, okay, what do you have, blah, blah, blah. And there have been times when I said, you're right. I missed that call. I blew it. I got it too fast. Whatever I say to them. Sometimes they'll look at you. Okay, you're right. I was wrong. We're moving on with the game. And so I think it is important at any time when you've made a mistake, the ethically responsible thing to do is own the mistake. We all make mistakes. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It just means you made a mistake. Own the mistake and move forward with the call. And then the last thing I have on my list is just to be humble, which I try to do in my job. I don't think, the referees, sometimes they get egotistical. I don't, and I try not to do that. And I think it's one of the most important ethical things of administrators, right? This isn't about me. I'm here to try to advance the university. I'm here to try to create an environment. At the end of the day, one of the questions that always goes through my mind with any decision that's being made is, what's in the best interest of our students? How is this going to advance the university? How is this going to make this place a better place? It's not about me. It's not about any individual. It's about the students, and it's about the institution. And if you embrace that ideology, I think it can be incredibly helpful for you not to start to, again, be hypersensitive when someone's critical of you. Well, they're criticizing a decision. It's my decision, but they're criticizing this, so we need to think about that, not me personally. And so some examples, and I want to hear from Alexis first, but before we would talk about these, but there are things that I've encountered, particularly around allocation of decisions. I've had very difficult decisions, particularly at my previous institution, where we had to make budget cuts, where we had to eliminate faculty lines. I can tell you there's nothing more painful for someone than to send out letters that says we're terminating your position. When I would do that with budget cuts, I would typically try to meet face to face. People say, "I just send the letter." I was like, I can't. I need to meet with these people because they've been here a while, and this is a very hard decision to make. But it was one that I thought was ethically responsive to the specific situation. And then the pandemic. Boy, there were a lot of issues that arose in the pandemic that if anything felt like refereeing basketball, it was getting this university through a pandemic. Because there was no decision I could make that wasn't going to have somebody yell at me. We're going to have a mask mandate. You can't have a mask mandate. This is violating my rights. Okay, we're not going to have a mask. You can't. You got to have a mask mandate. This is hurting our health and safety. And so these were incredibly challenging issues because we had, it didn't matter. I was going to get letters with vaccine mandates, mask mandates, what we were doing in classes, what we weren't doing in classes. It felt very much like that basketball-esque environment. And so, again, I tried to incorporate a lot of the experiences that I had in terms of officiating. I think helped inform me, helped me get through some of those challenging circumstances, and which in retrospect, I feel that we moved through well, and fortunately I think we're past the pandemic. But I'm happy to talk about some of those, but we didn't talk about how we doing this. You just want to chat for a while?
Oh, we don't need two microphones, do we? Okay. Thanks, Provost Vaught. And I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to speak a little bit to what my role is, but also some of the interesting cases I've had to interact with that, for me, were real ethical dilemmas in some ways. But my name's Alexis Palmer. I'm the Associate Vice President in Student Affairs and the Dean of Students. Really, that just means is my job is to try to advocate for students and to make sure that you're getting your needs met at the university so that you can be successful in the classroom. So that might be everything from making sure that we're providing appropriate mental health services for you, to our food pantry, to student programming, clubs, all our recreation and connecting you back to the university, just lots of different resources that we have to make sure that you can be successful so that you can ultimately graduate. That's the goal for all of us. I hope it's your goal too. I've been in this position for about 9 years now, and I'm going to look at my notes really quick if that's okay with everyone. Some of the influences that impact me when I have to do decision making or determining how I'm going to address a specific issue is legal ramifications. So there are many state and federal policies that govern what I can and can't do, which is difficult when you want to do something this way and you can't because there is a federal law that tells you you can't do that. Institutional mission. Sometimes what I think might be best for students isn't necessarily what the institution mission might agree with. So that can cause some barriers and tension in terms of that decision making for me. Using a student development framework, and that includes everything from when we're interacting with students and having a trauma-informed approach when we're working with students in our conduct office, to letting students fail when they're putting on a student program, and people asking, why are you letting that student group do that program? Well, it's not for me and it's not for you, it's for that student group. And if that's what they want to do and that's important to them, then we're going to provide the resources and to help them make that happen. And that includes different theories and models that we might use in our student development world. Professional associations, so guidelines and ethics that you have to adhere to with our National Association for Student Affairs Professionals, or as a conduct officer, specifically in our Student Rights and Accountability Office, they're looking at the Association for Student Conduct Administrators and what are the ethics that they have to follow. And then just your own personal values and beliefs. You're always having to navigate that. So those are just a few of those influences that impact. There was a study that I looked at, and it said one of the most challenging issues underlying ethical dilemmas were identified as political interference, sexual assault cases, situations involving athletes, and interactions with parents or other family members. And this was specifically done for a study on deans of students across the nation. And those were those issues that they really struggled with in looking at the ethics of those interactions. So I have a few cases. I don't know if anyway, I'm going to try to be like as anonymous as I can, but I don't know, some of you might know more than others. So maybe I'll mention two, or maybe I'll mention one, and then we'll go from there, if that's okay? Yeah. Is that all right? Okay. So when I first got into this position 9 years ago, I've actually been at the institution for 19 years now as a full-time employee. And I mean, I know I look like a student. I just wanted to clarify that. Just kidding. Just kidding. Student media is one of the areas within my portfolio, within student development and well-being. And at that time, they actually reported to me, up through me. The coordinator over student media reported directly to me. And now they report to our Deputy Dean of Students, Ashley Larson, which is amazing. And they were working on an article where they needed resources. They needed to find out, who can I talk to about this specific situation? And my job is viewpoint neutral. People, that's another ethical dilemma. People say otherwise sometimes, and I might give you another example of that, but it is viewpoint neutral. And my job is to help those students who write for the UVU review. I want them to be successful. I want them to have the skills that they need so when they graduate from UVU, they can be excellent journalists. And so if they're coming to me and asking me, who can I talk to about this? I'm going to help them find the person to talk to. And that might be giving them the name of the department that they need to get a hold of, or it's like, oh, actually, I know this person really well. Let me see if I can reach out to them and see if they have time to meet with you. I'm not going to ask the questions. I'm not going to be there with the student, but I'm going to help get some resources for them. And in this specific situation, I connected them with a department that they were had some concerns about, and it was some concerns related to safety. And the students wrote the article. And remember, students learning to be journalists. And it's a lab. It's an experience that you're getting so that when you leave UVU, you have those skills. And maybe you don't make some of the mistakes that you might make here as a journalist. And that's okay. I'd rather have you fail here than when your job's on the line. But they wrote the article, and the article was factual. It was very well done, and it was factual. But people in administration didn't like the article, didn't like how it portrayed. And that was really hard for some people. And a specific person, they're no longer here anymore, came to my office and specifically said, your job is to be loyal to UVU. Your job's not to advocate for students. Let me clarify that right now. No, that's not my job. I recognize UVU pays my paycheck, but my job was to help those students find the resources they needed. And if they wrote something that you don't agree with, then you can write a letter to the editor. That's a process that we have in media and in the free press and in free speech. But it wasn't me writing that article. The students wrote it. They did a good job. And yeah, you might not like it, but I'll continue to help the students find the resources they need. I might not have liked the article. And there have been many times where I haven't agreed with the articles. But that's, again, it's not about me. It's about what the students are experiencing. Another one, can I give one more? Sure. Are you sure?
Sure, panel.
well, I don't know if it's my panel. This is our panel. Another example, this is really recent, where, again, I want to be really clear here. We have to be viewpoint neutral in our office. So if there is a club that wants to be chartered on campus and someone doesn't agree with it, I'm sorry. They still get to be a club. There is free speech policies that allow for that, and there's other policies. But for that specific student group and organization, they get to have the same opportunities as other students. In this specific instance, a speaker was brought to campus recently, and it upset many students. And the students who were really concerned about the speaker who came asked if they could meet with me because they were concerned about how the speaker was chosen and why they were coming to campus. And so I was able to have a conversation with them and help them recognize, first of all, it's not me who's choosing the speaker. Speakers are going to come all the time to campus at any college or university that you may or may not agree with. But here's what I can help you with. Because they were like, how do we get to administration? How do we let people know we don't agree with this? We want to do a protest. Great, you can do a protest. My job is to help you educate yourself on how to do a meaningful and safe protest. I want to make sure you're safe. So if I can provide you with the information and provide you access so that you can do the protest, that's what I'm going to do. Even if other people on campus disagree with me doing that. Because I'm going to do that for any student group that wants to protest, because I want them to have a meaningful and experience in a place where they can be able to let campus know how they're feeling. And so it was a very powerful protest. And I was so impressed with the two student leaders who were over that protest and had many conversations with them to make sure that they felt like they were going to be safe while they were doing this. And in the end, it was a safe experience for those students. And talking to the organizers of the main event, the speaker, they felt like the participants who were coming to the event had a very positive experience as well. So in that instance, it went well. But what the issue is sometimes people are like, wait, I don't understand why the students are mad about this. You don't have to understand why. You don't have to understand, but you have to let them be able to voice how they're feeling and recognize that for a group of students, this was impacting them at a level that none of us might understand. And vice versa. If another speaker comes to campus that has different ideology than somebody else, and we have groups of students who want to protest that, I'm going to help them protest, regardless of what my views are. So I feel daily I'm interacting with these different ethical dilemmas that are primarily these looking about the legal ramifications, institutional mission, that student development framework, the professional associations, and personal values and beliefs. But in the end, if it's going to help students, then I'm always going to err on the side of students, contrary to what others may tell me to do. Hopefully I still have a job. So, no, I do.
That's great.
Thank you.
Wayne, you had mentioned a couple of
cases
events.
as well,
Yeah.
and I'll kind of piggyback on Alexis's comment about, a recent speaker on campus. We got questions when I saw a talk with Tamina, as I'd forgotten she was going to ask me that question right up at the moment, but it was, why would we allow, in this case it was Mike Pence on campus, given the divisiveness of many of his ideas. And the response was, and I think it reflects, one of the most important things for a university is to be a marketplace of ideas. I think there are very few places in the world that should be as protected, where you can come and feel free to engage in public debate over very controversial issues. And as Alexis said, people should feel safe in an environment where they can engage in that public debate over deeply held, very controversial, oftentimes very opposing positions. But the university has to be a place in where that is allowed to happen. And so the protection of freedom of speech, the protection of academic freedom, it's one of the things that's, I think, is just the absolute most fundamental cornerstone of what a university is and is supposed to be. And it's one of my ethical obligations as the chief academic officer of the institution is to ensure that and to promote that environment. And so this could, I guess, be an example. But yeah, I gave a couple of other examples around budgeting decisions around the pandemic. Another area where there were incredibly conflicting ideas about how this should or shouldn't be managed. And it wasn't just within the university. The state legislature decided to step in and pass specific legislation regarding what we could or couldn't do regarding the mask mandate. And the legislation never specifically said we couldn't mandate masks. They only said we could only do it if the County Board of Commissioners authorized us to do it. And the County Board of Commissioners made it very clear that they would never, under any circumstance, authorize a mask mandate. So it put us in that awkward position of having to be compliant with state law, of recognizing where our dollars come from in order to support the university, but recognizing that there were people on both sides of this debate that I think were making compelling arguments and had concerns about their own health, safety, and well-being were always at play, and we had to navigate that difficult minefield of decision-making. And so there were a lot of conversations, a lot we listened to, again, kind of that patient whistle idea. We really weighed and listened to anyone and everyone who had an idea, who had a position to take, and then we had to make a decision. We implemented that decision and then moved forward with it. Just like a referee makes a call, you're going on with the game. We can't sit back and reflect on whether I made the right call or not. We've done it. I think we've done it carefully and have to move forward. And then you can go home at night feeling I've fulfilled my ethical responsibility to the community that I serve. They may not agree with it, at least half of them may not agree with it, some of them will. But you know, at the end of the day, I'm not trying to official referee, provost, we're not trying to make friends, we're not trying to get accolades, we're trying to do the right thing and make the right call in some very, very difficult situations. So, though we do want to make friends, I guess.
Thanks to both of you. It occurred to me as a recovering administrator myself.
Sorry.
You never fully recovered.
Correct. That when I would have these moments when I was sitting in my office in academic affairs where I was fantasizing about teaching a 4 o'clock ethics and values class every day, and that the class would consist of me going into that class and sharing with them the experiences of the day and decisions I had to make in light of ethical principles that they were studying in class. And if it was possible, it wasn't possible, but if it was possible to actually have full confidentiality where I could actually disclose all the dimensions and moving parts to the decisions that I was being asked to make or that were foisted upon me, it just occurred to me that it would be, I think it would be a deeply meaningful experience for the students just to process, right, and go through someone's, just step into the shoes of someone trying to navigate a complex set of relationships in an ethical way that abides by the law, that promotes academic freedom, that advocates for students, right, that doesn't alienate the resources that make our university possible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a thought that occurred to me, and someday I may actually teach a class where if there's enough distance between the class and the events that took place, I may be able to raise some case studies along those lines. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to share that. Let's open it up for comments, questions. Now, in the interest of transparency, candor, respect, I would ask that you keep your questions or comments brief, right? That they're succinct and concise in the best, according to best practices in
And we scheduled
academia.
this so that Alexis would answer all the questions, I believe. Is that the way?
Is that what we
that's what
decided?
we
I
approved?
didn't get that message.
If they're hard questions.
Yeah.
Listen,
So succinctness, just
You
in
already
the
said
interest
president and
of being inclusive and allowing as many people to speak as possible. We've got about a half an hour, so.
Okay, I'll go as quickly as possible, and I want to follow up on the idea of the marketplace of ideas, which I think is a great ideal. That said, a lot of the town halls in the last 3 years, talks with Tuminez, et cetera, I think nobody is tracking this, but the percentage of time that administrators are speaking versus students, and especially faculty, students and faculty is going way down in terms of time allotted versus what the administration is telling us. I'd like to see a little bit more balance in that. And the second part of this is actually a question. We've had Wendy Watson Nelson, who is one of the most prominent and controversial local state figures. And we've had Mike Pence, who is also a very prominent conservative figure. If we're having a marketplace of ideas, who are their counterparts?
Well, at commencement last year, we had a commencement speaker who was the polar opposite of Ms. Nelson. So we have tried to balance that out. I think we got a lot of really good positive feedback from the speaker and her message, and I mean, from our perspective, you know, the issue of addressing commencement speakers is one of the most, I don't know why we even do them anymore. It just seems to, like in many institutions, it just seems to be designed to cause controversy. But I think that, you know, the perspective of the administration is not, and I've been in these conversations, it's not like we're trying to push one thing or another. There are people whose names come up who are either prominent in this, and the ones that you've mentioned, there were a lot of people who praised that person being on campus, and there were a lot of people who are angry about that person being on campus. And so that person was on campus. And so last year when Mary was here and speaking, she's head of the Federal Reserve Bank, president of Federal Reserve Bank San Francisco, a very high, prominent person, and an out member of the LGBT community. So I think we're trying our best to have a campus where anybody that's invited would again feel comfortable speaking. So.
and I'll just I'm not a part of the group that does President Talk with Tuminez. I'm not included in those conversations, but I know the person who plans it, so I can send your feedback to them if you're okay with that. Yeah, but then they might say like, well, then Alexis, you can start doing it. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I'll say if you're okay with that. Okay.
Just we got some criticism from last year's commencement speaker as well. People who thought that this was outrageous that we would invite somebody like this to campus. So I think we're doing things right if we're getting that kind of comment on both sides of the spectrum. So there's been talk about that. I don't know, and that wasn't an administrative decision. That was obviously with Governor Herbert's new institute, and Governor Herbert and Mike Pence are long friends, and he invited him to campus. Governor Herbert, in my conversations with him, is very much, he likes the public debate. And, I think he comes from a particular position politically and things, but I think that you will see a diversity of individuals coming to campus with diverse opinions and backgrounds. And so proof's in the pudding, as they say. We'll wait and see what happens, but it would certainly be my desire to see that happen on campus.
One complicating factor in speaker invitations is that different entities on campus make different decisions and have different criteria for for who's going to be invited. So the commencement speaker is among obviously the most high profile of those. And obviously there needs to be a holistic look at over the years, right, who the commencement speakers are. But you could have a trend where, right, the high profile speakers on campus, whether they're invited by the Herbert Institute or the Center for the Study of Ethics or the presidential lecture or whatever entity, right, it could trend in one direction. And then it's up to administrators, I would think, to be able to look at it holistically and utilize their ability to invite speakers to create that kind of balance. But it can't happen immediately because in some cases administrators don't, right? It's inappropriate for them to insert themselves in the decision-making process of other units on campus or other places. So that thought just came to mind.
I think you almost partially answered my question. I am curious of the procedures that take place that bring high value or high PR sorts of speakers to campus, because obviously the marketplace of ideas is a wonderful ideal, but it's not free, right? The marketplace isn't free, and there's a pool of
true.
candidates and so forth who are willing to come or paid and so on. So what are the procedures or processes, sort of the machinations behind all of this that would help us understand that more?
There isn't a single process and
It's-
procedure.
Yeah, it's different for every department. So I can speak to how UVUSA does it because that's the only department that I work with that brings speakers in. So, and then the commencement, though, there is a process now for commencement.
There
Do-
is.
I don't know if
Faculty Senate work to develop.
Yeah, Faculty Senate developed
So there's a
that.
committee of faculty, and they meet and they solicit names, and then they make their recommendations to the names. It goes to but the president, at the end of the day, has the ultimate decision to decide who to bring to campus.
For
But there is
commencement.
For commencement.
But for ethics, you have your own process of who you're going to bring.
Yes, we have a board, and I've never consulted.
Nor do you need to. Yeah. So UVUSA, it changes every year based on what students were elected in those positions, and then they have their student senators and their department reps, and I'm going to forget some of them. But yeah, so they meet in May after they're elected, and they plan out the year based on surveys that they've done of what and who are willing to come to Utah. So some years their budgets are low and we'll have to keep it really local, and sometimes they can find an individual who's willing to donate their time. That is very few and far between, but that's all I can speak to is because that's a student group that I know of.
Kyle Rios teaches sometimes a course on university administration, and I saw his
master's program.
saw his syllabus, and I said, Kyle, there's nothing here about shared governance. And he said, oh, that'd be a good idea. Anyway, Wayne, you mentioned shared
I do,
governance,
yeah.
and I know you believe in it, and I watched you work with Hillary and the Senate, and that's really important. So it feels to me like our university, other universities too, are becoming more and more like corporations. So when I was chair of our department a couple of years ago, I got an HR message that was to all people managers. And I responded, I'm not a people manager, I'm a faculty member and I'm a department chair. And universities have a structure that's different from corporations. One of the things that's most important in our shared governance, in my mind, is respect. And respect is based on decisions we make and discussions we have. And I'm thinking right now about a set of decisions that came from your office that feel like they're disrespectful for faculty members. Each one of them had to do with a promotion or tenure. And if your office, you sign the letters, if you disagree with the RTP committee and a department chair and a dean, you're supposed to give your reasons, and they should be good reasons. They should be based on a good, deep look at the portfolio. I'm just going to read you your entire reason for denying one of these. You have several low SRI scores and concerning student comments. You need to better document your scholarly activities. That's all you wrote. When that's all you write, it feels disrespectful of the people involved. And then when people appeal those, it takes 2 Senate-based committees of faculty members a lot of time to work on those. And each of these 3 cases, those committees have recommended overturning your decision because they were arbitrary and capricious and based so narrowly on SRI scores. And it feels disrespectful. You've never made me feel disrespected, but these kind of decisions make us feel disrespected.
And certainly I appreciate the question for those in the audience and students. This is a kind of a complex process. Faculty members, as they come to the university, are hired as assistant professors. You have what's called a probationary period in which you have to demonstrate excellence in teaching, research, and service to the university. At the end of that probationary period, you're evaluated by your peers in a long process by which faculty members then and decisions are made about whether to award tenure, advanced promotion, or rank advancement. And there are some details here about this. I've had conversations with the amount of information that gets conveyed and how that information is getting conveyed to faculty, and certainly appreciate and the office, as I've already talked to them about it, about ensuring that if that decision like that is made, it's not that there weren't documented evidence and reasons and justifications for that, and that's actually being provided to faculty now, a much more detailed explanation for decisions that are being made as those come in through the president. And I vowed to work with Hillary to be sure that that happens in the future so that people will understand in more detail. This was in part, it was a matter of historical precedent and legal reasonings for how letters are written, but it wasn't meant to be disrespectful, but clearly that it came across that way to some, and so our office will work to address that so that it comes across. I don't disagree with any of the decisions that were made. If I sign a letter, it means that I'm signing off my acknowledgement and agreement with the details of the letter. And you know, in appeals processes, there are things that I agree with the appeals committee sometimes, and sometimes I think the appeal committee got it wrong, and their reasoning that came to me was wrong, or I couldn't understand it itself. So anyway, a complicated process to say that, again, this is an example of where in a leadership role I have to be willing to understand. You're not the first person that's told me that faculty were concerned about the amount of information being given to them. And I've said, okay, I think maybe our office could do better, and we'll do better in the future to be sure that faculty feel that they're being respected. That being said, there's never been a circumstance where I've never signed one of those letters. I said, remember, when I was in my previous institution, one of the most difficult things you have to do is, I think in any job, at least for me, maybe some others people feel better about it, but it's terminating. Tell somebody that they're no longer going to be employed or denying something as significant. And so these are decisions that weigh heavily on me. I take them very seriously. They're not done brashless. They're certainly under no circumstance done capriciously, at least in my judgment. And so I'm committed to making sure that the faculty are given absolute full respect at this university, so, and students as well.
I can't see you. I'll just stand up. So I'm just curious. I know that there's no system or set of policies or set of laws that is absolutely equitable. And I'm not talking about a specific policy, process, or law. But I'm just curious about leading in the academic context. How do you lead ethically within systems that are sometimes inequitable, and what do you do to make change when you notice that?
I got the tenure thing. You got to take that one.
Wait.
Huh? You can start.
I mean,
I'm
I
happy
can,
to.
I can speak, I guess, to, yeah. I mean, I think the system of higher ed is inequitable in many aspects of it. So we are in like, that's just the system that we're in. So all I can focus on is the pieces that I might be able to change. And if I can't change it, maybe let me speak to it this way. Providing care for students versus the policy. So what the law says we have to do on a certain situation, federal and state law, is it can actually be more harmful to students. So we're going to then go above and beyond that and find some workarounds to be able to provide the care for that student who may have experienced a specific situation. And yep, we'll do that bare minimum that the federal law says that you have to do that is very transactional. And then we're going to figure out how to go behind and get creative to provide other types of care for that person, contrary to what we may be told we're supposed to do. We're going to do beyond that. So all I can do is just focus on the pieces that I can control in that specific situation. I know it's not I mean, then yeah, of course, we can make policy changes. Takes a long time, but that's something I do appreciate about UVU is if you want a policy change, there's a process to do it. You can go to that person who's over that specific policy, university policy. It takes a long time, but you can start the process and create that change. And I think, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, diversity issues are they're on our radar all the time. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are kind of rolls right off the tongue in terms of the types of initiatives and the things that we need to be thinking about. You know, UVU is a unique institution, an open enrollment institution with a come-as-you-are mentality, and that's come as you are regardless of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, whatever it may be. You should feel at home at UVU. And not everyone does. And we do our surveys and we get feedback on areas where we still have a lot of room to grow. And it can vary from different areas in the university. But we're trying to, well, because you asked the question, but we have some diversity fellows, diversity, equity, inclusion faculty fellows. And Jesse is one of those fellows helping with engaged learning issues. We have one that's focusing on curricular issues and helping faculty learn how to design courses, how to create a course environment that is inclusive. And we have one working on faculty issues, that is the recruitment, the retaining, the promotion of a diverse faculty at UVU. And so all of those things are commitments that we have to have. And they do take an active involvement. You don't, you know, the issue with diversifying faculty, and particularly in faculty hires, you'll get, well, you know, you just got to hire the best person, which is a kind of a non sequitur. I mean, what you want, obviously you want to hire the best people, but you get the best people and you get a diverse pool of people by going out and actively recruiting and getting a rich pool, a diverse pool of candidates to choose from. And when you do that, you're often going to hire the best person who happens to increase your diversity as well. And so I think sometimes the other things will be said as a way of sort of dismissing that obligation. And I think this university has a lot of room to grow in that regard. And it's something that I think that it's a responsibility that I feel I have as an administrator to do things that I can to help promote that as best I can. But it's hard. It's a very difficult and challenging task.
Just going back to the question about faculty decisions, the legal environment, it seems to me, is increasingly constraining on the kind of communication that can take place when informing faculty. And legal counsel will always tell you the less you say, the better. Sometimes that is adhered to, right, and absorbed, and there are good reasons for it. But we all know that that can be the arena where mischief can happen, where the administration can do something, right, and behind a cloak of, right, legal constraint, not have to account for that. I think that's a really tricky situation, right? And that's where it comes back to this question of trust and judgment and track record and transparency to the extent that's even possible.
Well, that comes up to another, I don't know if you guys know the question, but one of the most challenging things in a university is privacy. It's not just privacy within the context of employment issues, but FERPA. Does anybody know what FERPA stands for? Everybody here know FERPA? The Federal Education.
I do know FERPA
If
very
you don't,
well.
it's a Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, passed in about 1972, I believe it was. And what FERPA does is guarantee that your information as students is protected. So when you're in high school, your parents can find out your grades and they can do all that stuff. When you're a university student, they cannot. And so it doesn't matter who's paying for your education.
They might try.
And
Sometimes
and
they
they
do.
do. I've had many a
They
phone
call
call.
our office.
We can't even acknowledge that you're a student at UVU. And that can create, sometimes it gets into these, I'm worried about my student there. There can be health risks or certain things that get reported, and you'd be the right person to talk to about that, that we can try to intervene, but it becomes very difficult because we can't tell your grade. I just paid all this tuition money, and I want to know if they got A's or not. Like, well, call them. Don't call us. We won't call you. I mean, we have some real restrictive privacy rules that govern what we can do and say, and sometimes it gets us in awkward positions where we would like to say or defend ourselves against certain things, but we just can't. And so, you kind of feel like you're got one hand tied behind your back and you're in a boxing match, but it's just kind of the way it is legally.
I don't mean to be a contrarian, Provost Vaught, but I just want to clarify for the group that FERPA actually does allow us to confirm enrollment of individuals and does allow us to release directory information, such as phone numbers, addresses, things like that, which implies that we can verify whether or not someone's enrolled. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But the directory information they have to give authorization to, I believe.
No.
The student does?
No.
Not even now?
They have to opt out of it. So they're automatically opted in, they have to opt out.
But they still couldn't get access to grades or anything like that.
Yeah,
Not great.
Just, yeah.
General directory information unless they opt out. But if they do opt out, then we can't provide it.
You've gone already. I know, but this is
We've got,
Do you feel like
this is an equitable and
equitable, fair. Brian and I teach our class.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm a humanities professor, so this is a humanities. I have a loaded question.
For
the humanities
Alexis?
for Professor Vaught,
I'm
or
sorry.
actually
Oh,
Provost Vaught.
no, he just said
So my question
don't I have
is,
an appointment at?
yeah, okay.
No, I'm joking.
I have, so it's a loaded question, then I have like two assumptions and then a dilemma. So the assumptions are, one, that the humanities nationally, even locally, is under siege. So that's just a presumption I'm making. I think that's true and it's defensible. The second presumption is that the humanities is core to a university, and if that is undermined, then the university is no longer a university. And I presume that in the administration that people of goodwill share those presumptions. So assuming those two, right, presumptions, the dilemma is then, you mentioned, of course, like we have to be mindful of where our dollars come from. And to me, it's very evident that it's not just being mindful where the dollars come from, but the dollars are actually governing, are quite sovereign. And in very insidious ways, that's how the humanities gets undermined in some ways, is like through defunding. And so your analogy of being a basketball referee, I would use another analogy. You're being an executive officer on a ship. That ship might be the Titanic in some ways. Maybe we're like a mile and a half off the iceberg, but rather I don't think that's actually what's the case. It's more that we've sprung a lot of leaks, and the humanity is going to die a slow death, so like a death by a million paper cuts.
Yeah.
So in the ethical sort of administrator of goodwill who may agree with the two presumptions I'm making, you may or may not, how do you deal with the overwhelming forces that are arrayed against maintaining a vibrant humanities education?
Yeah. No, I think that was a really good question. I agree with your assumptions. And whether it is directly under attack or whether it's just being ignored or seen as irrelevant is what I'm more concerned about. And I think it may be more the latter than the former, because you have so many forces that are at play in higher education, particularly around funding for higher education. And so with the cost of higher ed and the cost of student loan debt that students have and they're leaving, and that return on investment question is just at the top of their minds, and rightfully so. I'm spending a lot of money for a college education. I want to know that I'm gonna get a job. I'm gonna have a career. So part of my strategy has long been to, with a great appreciation for the fact that as a trained in philosophy and appreciator of the humanities, and that there's a value to it in and of itself that's an intrinsic value that doesn't exist just for instrumental purposes. There's an instrumental story I have to tell, and that is when you go out and you talk to business people. We were just in an International Advisory Board meeting yesterday, and they kept coming up, well, the business people, they keep saying what we need are students who can communicate effectively, who can think critically, and can work in groups and engage, and that's what we want. Because we're going to train them, and they'll even hear, recognize, just I don't want to dispel your beliefs in the technology world, but the things that we're teaching you in technology in your freshman year are probably going to be obsolete by the time you graduate, and then the companies are going to retrain you when you get there in a lot of ways anyway. Now, what you're developing is a certain foundational skill set that's absolutely critical to your success there, but you've got to learn, and you can't just think that higher education is about amassing some particular body of information, and once you've got that body of information, you graduate, because that information is going to change, and we're in one of the fastest changing, fastest paced worlds ever. So what helps you do that? It helps you by thinking critically about issues that people have thought about for 2,000 years and trying to come up with novel and innovative solutions to those things, to recognize the importance of philosophy, of history. Obviously we're doomed to repeat history if we don't understand our history. So there are things that you can, I don't want to say commercialize humanities, but there are ways that you can show that the humanities help you develop a very critical skill set. And there's evidence. We can go and point to the evidence that shows people who have majored in particular humanities or double majored have very successful careers because they have the skill sets that they need. Not in that job one, and that was the other thing we're talking about. If you take an English major and someone who even comes here for 18 months and gets a tech certificate and gets a coding job, who's going to have the highest income right out of the university? Probably that coding person, right? Throughout their career, though, we know that the humanities people fare incredibly well, and they do incredibly well in life and in their careers. And so you can demonstrate that there is a value added to the humanities. It should be part of the core mission of the institution, part of our core general education curriculum, because it's developing transferable skill sets. Just like, learning basketball, you can be a provost. Learning English, you can be a better business person. The former dean at when I was working with the UMKC, she was an English major. Our president is a Russian literature major, and she's absolutely dedicated to the humanities. Talks about that all the time. So how do we get that up to the legislature? How do we get that out to the people who are investing resources and the dollars? And I can tell you that there are legislators who continue to talk about the degrees to nowhere. And I was talking to the commissioner the other day, and I said, I'm not sure what that is, a degree to nowhere. Now, there may be career plans to nowhere. I'm in school, and I don't know what I want to do. I'll just major in psychology. So I don't know what I want to do. Well, if you don't know what you want to do and you don't have a plan or action, you're probably going to end up there. But if you have if our guidance, if our faculty, if our advisors can help you understand, I want to go from here to here, there are lots of roads to get there, and the humanities give you an incredibly valuable path to get to that direction. So I think we need to think about career paths and opportunities, not degrees. And I just fear that sometimes in the legislative mind, it's if I want to be an engineer, I major in engineering. If I want to be, I major in that thing. But I think it's a little too narrow thinking. And there's data out there that supports it. We just have to try to keep telling that story. And I think that can help.
Thank you. We are at time, but if someone has a last comment or question. All right. Obviously, there are a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to say, right? We barely scratched the surface, but hopefully, at least for our part, we'll try to cultivate open conversations, and that's part of our job on campus in the Ethics Center is to try to facilitate those, and we're committed to it, and we'll keep trying to do it. So thank you for your time late in an afternoon, right? Enjoy your day, but please join me in thanking Alexis and Wayne.